federal level. There will actually be supervisory authority over non-bank financial institutions. It doesn't level the playing field perfectly, but it begins to bring it up just a little bit, take some of that tilt back out of the system, and gives good competitors a little stronger footing, a little better chance in a challenging marketplace. Okay, so those are two ways that I think the consumer agency can be helpful here. I want to talk about a third, and that is just to talk a little bit about the vision for the consumer agency. And I picked this one because Ken and I like to talk about markets. And so what this is about what I think we need to have a consumer financial market that actually works. What's it going to take to make this market work, at least some? And so here's the vision, is that at the consumer agency, we think about, it's a very market-driven model that we've built into this agency. Our research analysis and rule writing is all wrapped in together, and it's market-facing. It's divided into teams. The revolving debt, which is credit cards, it's got mortgages, it's got installment loans like student loans, not that anybody here has those, and payment systems like stored value cards and checking accounts, and then the last one, not quite parallel, debt collection and credit reporting that we've got together here. So the idea is we read, we understand about these markets, we do a lot of research on these markets, we organize supervision in many of the same ways. It's going to be for the first time product-driven supervision. As we do these, and by the way, I should just go ahead while I'm doing it and do kind of the third leg of the stool, we also will be doing education, consumer education. So what's the vision of what it takes to make a market work? Well, the first one is the prices ought to be clear. It ought to be clear to consumers what you're paying for something. Whether it's a credit card, whether it's a mortgage, whether it's a student loan, it ought to be clear what the thing costs. The second one is the risks ought to be pretty easy to see. It ought to be perfectly clear to someone whether or not what you're talking about is something that is fixed or variable rate on an interest, and a little bit about what the impact of that is for families. The third part, I think it's related to this, is the fine print isn't hiding any of the terms or any tricks. You know, I always worry about, I think one of the most dangerous things about fine print is not what's in the fine print itself. It's like shrubbery where muggers can hide out. You know, once you get enough fine print there, who knows what's back on page 16 between clause 34 and clause 35, right? What slips right in there. So fine print shouldn't be used to obscure, and that customers ought to be able to compare. 3 or 4 credit cards ought to be able to compare 3 or 4 mortgages, 3 or 4 of any financial product that they're dealing with. So ultimately what this is about is trying to make markets work. Make them work for families, for the consumers, make them work for honest competitors, and ultimately, in my view, make them work for the economy. So, does it have the tools to be able to get the job done? I'll just tell you very quickly what this does. It's a 3-legged stool. It has rule-making authority, so it can take those 19 federal statutes. It can, as we're doing with the TILA and RESPA, it can reinterpret those rules, write them, skinny them down, take out the duplications, give interpretations as Congress authorizes. As I said, very market-driven here, and really trying to do this on a data-driven basis. Second part of what we do is law enforcement. So a big part of this agency will be around supervision and enforcement. More than half our budget will be spent on folks just making sure that the largest financial institutions in the country will have jurisdiction over the 112 largest financial institutions in the country, 10 billion and above in assets, and over the non-bank financial institutions. So the first time helping level that playing field. Also, we'll have non-discrimination laws applied across the board for the first time. And I should add, we'll have a consumer complaint hotline. We are required by statute to add that. So that will be, and this will feed in to our enforcement. And then the third part of it is financial education. Whether or not we can get to a world in which we have somewhat smarter consumers that we're trying to get to. Again, the 2 things I can say about this, I really want to push for on this, is that we have evidence-based financial education. I am a believer that we measure financial education by whether or not it actually changes outcomes rather than by the number of people who took the course. Very different measures of success here. But there are some people who are doing some exciting and innovative things out there. And we really have an opportunity to create a national platform for them. So I'm going to wrap this up. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm getting over a terrible cold here. By saying, here's what I see about this consumer agency. A lot of things have changed in the economics of the middle class over the last generation. For a lot of different reasons that we could talk about. I think we're still trying to unpack and unthread parts of it. What I try to do is just talk about it, because a lot of people haven't paid much attention to what's been happening here in the middle. But the part, because I grew up in law, I'm a law professor, it's the tool I know, is to think about these changes in the law and how the changes in the law intersect with the economic health of middle-class America. And so what I'm hopeful is that this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau will give us the tools that over time we can repair this one part of a broken market, if you will forgive me the mixing metaphors, if it will give us a chance to repair a hole in the bottom of the boat for many middle-class American families. And so that's the long arc of both what I see has happened and the direction that at least gives me some hope that we might be able to make things somewhat better. So with that, I'm going to quit. Yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Ushers are walking through collecting cards. A couple of things I'd like to add while they collect your cards, if you have any questions. Two things I didn't add about Elizabeth that maybe you discovered. First, she used to be a Sunday school teacher.
It's true.
And secondly, she's married to a historian. So, and another thing about bourbon, we did have a final wrap-up party for this oversight panel that we were on. And as the Kentuckian, I was tasked with making mint juleps. And I want you to know I turned a lot of people on in D.C. onto mint juleps. And so we have a lot more mint julep drinkers in D.C. But Elizabeth, I believe, had an engagement at the White House that night. So she was not able to partake in the mint julep. So she did have the opportunity to get some of my brandy, or bourbon, excuse me. But we'll get her some more later. And I guess since before I'm an academic, and that means I get to ask questions too. And I guess one question I would have is, I think many people look at the forms when they sign mortgages and blame some of your colleagues for them. Presumably, as you indicated, a lot of the complicatedness of these forms come from litigation that were prompted by lawyers. How are we going to protect, if we simplify these forms and take out, presumably a lot of that's there to protect companies against lawsuits, how do we prevent it from occurring again, and how do we protect the companies from the lawsuits that may result because they don't have that 20% that's in their one form and not in the other, or something along those lines?
So it's a fair question. It's one we've been talking about a lot with the industry, and there are a lot of ways you can deal with it. I'm going to identify tools, okay, ways that one could think about this if one were a lawyer and putting it together. I don't want to make any moves here around this, but there are tools. One, for example, is safe harbors, and that is if you just create, as long as you use the following X, you're safe harbored from certain kinds of lawsuits. A second is definitional terms. Lawyers are actually pretty good at this. As long as you use terms that have been defined in the statute in the following ways, then you will be deemed to have said all of the things that you say that you think protect you from the lawsuits. The key point I want to make, though, because I really think this is important, is that we just sort of headed off into fine print land without ever acknowledging